So here's something most countries would never put in a history textbook. The United States did not win its independence because it was stronger. It didn't win because it had a better army. It didn't win because freedom magically made people fight harder. America won because it lied better than the British Empire. And not in a cool James Bond way. No tuxedos, no exploding pens, no dramatic last-second escapes. Just farmers, shopkeepers, a tailor, a bartender, and one woman everyone underestimated. This is the story of how an empire lost a war because it trusted the wrong information and underestimated the quiet people in the room. And before we go any further, if you like stories where history breaks logic, where empires panic, and where power comes from places it absolutely shouldn't, subscribe now. So here's the most un-American truth about the American Revolution. The United States didn't win because it was stronger. It didn't win because it had a better army, better training, or better supplies. It won because it learned to cheat smarter than the British Empire, and it kept cheating until Britain got tired. If you like history where logic breaks, empires panic, and the quiet people quietly change everything, subscribe now, because this story is not about heroic charges. It's about invisible ink, coded gossip, and the terrifying power of being underestimated. Picture the problem in 1778. Britain is the biggest empire on Earth. The Royal Navy is everywhere. The British Army is professional, experienced, and funded. Meanwhile, the American cause is held together by hope, grit, and a budget that could barely buy a decent horse. Washington's army is constantly short on food, uniforms, ammunition, and, famously, shoes. Soldiers desert. Politicians argue. States bicker. It's the kind of mess that usually ends with a sad surrender and a polite apology. George Washington knows this. He also knows something worse. The British often seem to know what he's doing. They show up in the right places. They anticipate movements. They feel informed. That means one of two things. Either the British have incredible instincts or someone is leaking information. Washington doesn't have the luxury of guessing. Every wrong move costs lives he cannot replace. So Washington decides to fight a war in a way that feels almost modern. He builds an intelligence system, not a glamorous spy agency with badges and theme music. A quiet network of ordinary people doing ordinary things while secretly moving information like contraband. The center of this story is New York City, which is occupied by the British and crawling with redcoats, loyalists, informers, and opportunists. New York is a fortress, a marketplace, and a rumor factory all at once. If you control the flow of information in New York, you control the war's heartbeat. Washington's spy master, Benjamin Talmadge, understands something simple. The best spies don't look like spies. Soldiers get watched. Gentlemen get noticed. The perfect spy is the person everyone ignores, the person who belongs in the background. So the network recruits civilians from Long Island and Manhattan. Abraham Woodhull, a farmer. Robert Townsend, a merchant with access to high society. Caleb Brewster, a boatman who can move quietly between shores. Austin Rowe, a tavern keeper and courier who can travel without suspicion. And, crucially, Anna Strong, a woman whose domestic routine becomes a signaling system. They're not superheroes. They're locals with normal lives, which is exactly why they work. The Culper Ring, as it becomes known, runs on layers. No one person knows everything. Messages move in pieces like a story told in fragments, so that if one person is caught, the whole network doesn't collapse. It's frustrating, slow, and brilliant, like building a castle out of small stones and refusing to tell anyone the blueprint. Now let's talk about the tools, because this is where history starts to feel like a heist movie written by accountants. They use aliases. Woodhull is Samuel Culper. Townsend is Culper Jr. They use numbers from a code book. Washington himself is usually 711. Places are numbers. Names are numbers. Common words become numbers. It's not poetic, but it is secure. If you don't have the key, you have nothing. And then there's invisible ink, the star of the show. The Culper Ring uses sympathetic stain, a chemical ink that doesn't show until treated. A letter can look boring. Talk of flower prices, family health, weather, and farm gossip. But hidden between those lines is a strategic bomb. Washington can read a harmless letter and see troop movements bloom out of nothing, like a ghost speaking. The British search for secrets in obvious places. Trunks, pockets, saddlebags. They aren't prepared for the fact that the paper itself is the hiding place. The most dangerous weapon in this war is not a musket. It's a page that looks dull. The Ring also uses dead drops, because handing someone a letter is how you die. Dead drops are simple. Hide a message somewhere, walk away, let someone else retrieve it later. A hollow tree, a buried container, a hidden crack in a fence. It sounds paranoid, and it is, because if you're caught, the penalty isn't a fine. It's prison or a noose. Communication moves like this. Townsend hears something in New York. He writes it in code. Woodhull receives it. Rowe carries it. Strong signals with laundry. Brewster boats it. Talmadge decodes it. Washington reads it. And then Washington decides where to move, where not to move, what to reinforce, what to bluff. That's the key. The Ring isn't just collecting facts. It's feeding Washington decision advantage. It lets him act like he has more troops than he does, because he can be in the right place at the right time more often than he has any right to be. But the truly lethal part isn't the intelligence. It's the manipulation. A spy network can do two things: tell you what's real and make your enemy believe something that isn't. The Culper Ring does both. They learn British plans, and they also plant narratives that guide British decisions. That's when espionage becomes strategy rather than trivia. Here's what Britain wants. Britain wants a clean win. Capture major cities, break the Continental Army, intimidate the rebellion into collapsing. Britain is used to wars where power looks obvious. But America is fighting with chaos, distance, and stubbornness. The British Army can take a city and still lose the countryside. They can win battles and still lose time. And time becomes the real currency. Washington's genius isn't flashy. It's defensive. It's survival. He avoids decisive battles when the odds are bad. He retreats. He frustrates. He makes the British chase him. And chasing an enemy across a huge landscape is expensive. The Culper Ring makes chasing worse. The British keep marching to places that stop matching. They prepare for attacks that never arrive. They guard supply depots that aren't threatened. They redistribute troops based on rumors that were planted specifically to waste their energy. When an empire is forced to react, it loses initiative. When it loses initiative, it burns resources. When it burns resources, it starts asking if this is worth it. And Britain does start asking that. Not because it's losing every battle. Britain isn't. Britain wins plenty. The war becomes unbearable because it's psychologically exhausting. And that's a form of defeat people underestimate. One of the Ring's most important contributions involves the French. French support is vital. Without French money, supplies, and naval power, the revolution likely dies. The British know this too. They consider ways to isolate or attack French assets. Intelligence about those moves matters. The Ring helps Washington anticipate threats and protect alliances. That's not cinematic in the moment, but it's decisive over years. Now, let's be honest, running a spy network in 1778 is basically doing cybersecurity with feathers and candles. Everything is slower. Every message can take days. A storm can ruin a delivery. A random patrol can intercept a rider. A suspicious officer can search a boat. Each link is fragile. So why does it work? Because it's built for resilience. The Ring isn't one pipeline. It's many small paths. If one route is blocked, another can carry the message. If one person is watched, another can step forward. This redundancy is why systems survive. It's also why empires fear networks more than armies. Networks can flex. The British, meanwhile, are trying to run a war like a machine. Machines are strong, but machines need predictable inputs. America is not predictable. America is messy, decentralized, improvisational. That chaos is a weakness in battle, but it's a strength in resistance. It makes the rebellion hard to decapitate. The Culper Ring turns that chaos into a weapon. It provides enough structure to coordinate without becoming rigid. It gives Washington eyes inside the occupied city, without exposing a single point of failure. It's the kind of thing modern organizations still struggle to build. Now let's talk about the people, because their ordinariness is the scariest part. These are not famous generals. They are not wealthy aristocrats. They're not even particularly protected. If they're caught, they die, and yet they keep doing it. Why? Some of them believe in independence. Some believe in local loyalty. Some may simply hate the British occupation. Some may be driven by personal relationships. Real history is never one motive. It's a braid. Robert Townsend, for example, is fascinating because he's a merchant with access to British circles. He can hear things because he belongs in rooms where officers talk. And officers talk because officers love talking, especially when they think the audience is harmless. The British aren't stupid, but they do have blind spots. One of the biggest blind spots in history is underestimating people who look non-threatening. Anna Strong's role becomes legendary because it's almost absurdly domestic. Laundry on a clothesline becomes signaling. A black petticoat means something. Handkerchiefs mean something. It's the kind of method that sounds like a joke until you realize it's a perfect cover. Nobody arrests someone for doing laundry. And that's the point. Austin Rowe travels long distances to carry messages. He's a tavern keeper. A tavern keeper traveling isn't weird. People travel for supplies, for business, for family. He looks like a man doing errands. But inside the ordinary movement is extraordinary risk. Caleb Brewster moves by boat, which is its own kind of danger. Night water is cold and unforgiving. Patrols exist. One mistake and you disappear. But water also provides stealth. It's a highway that doesn't have checkpoints in the same way. And Abraham Woodhull is a farmer rooted in place, which is useful because a farmer is expected to be there. He can receive, store, and forward information while looking like he's simply living his life. Together, they create a system where the most powerful weapon is plausibility. They aren't invisible because they're magical. They're invisible because their actions are explainable. Now, the British do suspect spies. They search, they interrogate, they arrest, they do catch people. Espionage always has casualties, but the ring survives. It survives because of compartmentalization and because the British are looking for the wrong shape. The British expect spies to be obvious. Military men, suspicious travelers, mysterious strangers. They don't expect the spy to be the person who hands them a drink or sells them fabric or carries a basket through town. This is a pattern, and it shows up everywhere in history. Empires become powerful by mastering certain kinds of threats. Then they start ignoring the threats that don't match their mental template. When you can't imagine how you're being attacked, you don't defend against it. That's why the Culper Ring matters. It's not just a neat story. It's a lesson in asymmetric power. When you can't win with strength, you win by changing the rules of what winning looks like. Let's zoom out for a moment. Many revolutions fail because they can't coordinate. They have energy, but no structure. The Culper Ring provides a quiet form of structure. It gives Washington enough reliable information to make fewer catastrophic mistakes. That alone can be the difference between a doomed rebellion and a stubborn one. And stubborn is dangerous. Britain expects the rebellion to collapse once the cost rises. It does not. Britain expects Washington to be trapped or forced into a decisive battle. He keeps slipping away. Britain expects to control New York and therefore control the narrative. The ring leaks the narrative. Think of war as a game of perception. Armies fight with weapons, but governments fight with belief. Belief is fragile. If Britain believes the war is unwinnable, it becomes unwinnable. If Parliament believes the colonies are not worth the cost, the colonies become independent. That's the hidden battlefield. The Culper Ring attacks belief. It makes British leadership uncertain. It makes their commanders hesitant. It makes them waste time, which is the one resource you cannot ship across an ocean easily. Every extra month is more money, more political pressure, more criticism, more fatigue. That's why the end of the war is not a single magical moment. It's a slow grind toward a decision. Is this worth it? Britain eventually answers no. Not because Britain loses every fight. Britain answers no because the war's cost in attention, money, and political stability becomes unbearable. This is how empires really lose. Not always by being smashed, sometimes by being exhausted. Now let's add a little meme honesty. The Culper Ring is basically the 18th century version of your enemy. Read the group chat. The British keep acting like they have good intel. They keep moving like they know what's happening. And the whole time, the information stream is being quietly edited. It's like playing chess against someone who isn't moving pieces. They're moving the board. And you keep blaming yourself for being confused because you assume the board is stable. It's not. Washington reads these reports and makes strategic choices that look cautious but are actually precise. He decides when to retreat, when to hold, when to reinforce, when to call a bluff. Intelligence doesn't win wars by itself. It wins wars by helping you avoid losing them. That's another uncomfortable truth. Most wars are lost, not won. The winner is often the side that makes fewer fatal mistakes. The Culper Ring helps America make fewer fatal mistakes. And it does something even more subtle. It gives Washington confidence. Not arrogance, but confidence. When you're outmatched, confidence is a resource. If you don't know what your enemy is doing, you become reactive and fearful. If you have a window into their plans, you can choose your battles. Choice is power. This network also creates a psychological advantage. If Washington can anticipate British moves, he can appear smarter, faster, and luckier than he really is. The British start feeling like the Americans are always one step ahead. That's demoralizing. It makes commanders paranoid. It makes them question their own informers. That's when systems start eating themselves. Paranoia is corrosive. Once an army suspects everyone, it spends energy policing itself rather than fighting. Once officials suspect disloyalty everywhere, they become slow and cautious. And in a distant war, slowness is deadly. The Culper Ring, in other words, weaponizes doubt. It doesn't need to destroy British forces. It needs to erode British certainty. Certainty is what allows an empire to act decisively. Doubt turns decisiveness into hesitation. Hesitation turns power into waste. Now, it's important to remember that the Ring's members are constantly in danger. Britain can hang them. Britain can imprison them. Britain can ruin their lives even if it can't prove guilt. And yet they persist. Some historians argue that the secrecy was so effective that even after the war, many details stayed hidden to protect people from retaliation. That's why some parts are still debated. Secrecy worked, but it also erased credit, which is, frankly, the most spy thing possible. The better you are, the less anyone can prove you existed. And that's the real irony. The Culper Ring may have saved the revolution, but it did so in a way that didn't create a neat hero story. It's harder to celebrate a coded letter than a battlefield victory. It's harder to put invisible ink on a statue. But if you want to understand real power, you have to get comfortable with boring. Because boring is where systems live. Rome understood this concept centuries earlier. Rome built roads, logistics, alliances, and absorption. Rome cared about sustainability. Britain, in America, relied on force projection. Force projection is expensive. It requires certainty that the cost will be worth it. The Culper Ring makes the cost feel endless and the outcome uncertain. In the long run, survival beats glory. Systems that can replace losses beat systems that chase dramatic victories. Networks beat hierarchies when the battlefield is information. The American Revolution becomes, in part, a war of stamina and perception. The Culper Ring feeds stamina by reducing surprises, and it attacks perception by feeding misinformation. So what happens at the end? No fireworks in London. No dramatic surrender of the British Empire. There is simply a growing sense that this war is not giving Britain what it wants. Britain has bigger problems. France complicates everything. Costs rise. Political factions argue. Public support wavers. The empire shifts attention elsewhere. And America becomes independent. Not because America was the strongest, because America was the hardest to exhaust. That's the key takeaway, and it's still true today. The winner isn't always the one who hits hardest. It's often the one who can keep going while the other side gets tired of paying the bill. So what does this mean for you? Besides the obvious lesson that bartenders can secretly change the world, it means Pyrrhic victories aren't just military. They're everywhere. People chase wins that cost too much. Organizations chase growth that breaks their foundations. Leaders chase headlines that destroy trust. And opponents who can't win by strength win by patience, flexibility, and information. The Culper Ring is a reminder that you should always ask two questions. What does my enemy know? And what does my enemy think they know? Because those are not the same. And when those differ, you can move the world. The British Empire lost America in part because it underestimated ordinary people and overtrusted its own perspective. It assumed the most important actions would be visible. It assumed power would look like power. The Culper Ring proved that power can look like laundry, receipts, tavern chatter, and a dull letter about crops. And that's a terrifying thought because it means history can pivot on things we ignore. So the next time someone tells you history is decided by great men and great battles, remember this story. Remember that the revolution was kept alive by a network of people whose greatest strength was blending in. People who didn't need applause. People who didn't need credit. People who just needed the empire to make one more tired, expensive mistake. That's how empires fall, not always by being smashed, sometimes by being quietly outplayed. And that's why the Culper Ring matters. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. It was effective. It proves the most dangerous person in a conflict is often the one who doesn't look like a threat. The one who listens, waits, and nudges the giant in the wrong direction, one small piece of information at a time. So yeah, America didn't just fight. America also conned an empire, and the empire didn't even realize it until the bill arrived. If you want more stories like this, where strategy beats strength and patience beats panic, subscribe. Because history is full of moments where the side that should have lost simply refused to play by the rules. And sometimes, that's enough to make the most powerful empire in the world blink first. Now, if you're thinking, cool concept, but did it actually change decisions? Yes. The Ring's reports weren't vague vibes. They were operational. Which regiments arrived, which ships entered harbor, which commanders argued, which neighborhoods were restless, which plans were forming. Mood mattered because commanders make choices under stress. A confident general takes risks. A nervous general hesitates. The Culper Ring learned how to manufacture nervous generals. The geography is half the trick. The core of the ring operated around Connecticut on Long Island and British-occupied New York City. It looks close on a modern map, but in wartime, it was a maze of patrols, checkpoints, and cold water. Messages had to cross the Sound, move through towns, avoid searches, and still reach Washington without becoming evidence in a soldier's pocket. That's why the network had roles. Robert Townsend could gather intelligence inside the city because he belonged in rooms where officers talked too freely. Abraham Woodhull could receive and compile information on Long Island while looking like a farmer doing farmer things. Austin Rowe could travel as a tavern keeper buying supplies, which looked normal. Anna Strong could signal with laundry because nobody arrests someone for hanging clothes. Caleb Brewster could cross water by whaleboat at night. Benjamin Talmadge coordinated the whole pipeline, decoded messages, and delivered the usable parts to Washington. They used aliases and numbers. Woodhull became Samuel Culper. Townsend became Culper Jr. Washington often appeared as a number in their codebook rather than a name. Places became numbers. Common words became numbers. It wasn't poetic, but it was secure. If the British captured a letter, it looked like nonsense. And the real magic was invisible ink. A letter could discuss flour prices, sick relatives, and weather, while a hidden message waited between the lines. With a chemical reagent or heat, the secret appeared. The British searched trunks and pockets. They weren't prepared for the paper itself to be the hiding place. They also used dead drops because hand-to-hand delivery is how you die. Hide a message in a predetermined spot. Walk away. Let someone else retrieve it. A hollow tree, a buried container, a fence post, a rock pile. Simple, effective, terrifying. The Ring didn't just collect secrets. It shaped the British picture of reality. They fed misinformation, fake troop concentrations, exaggerated threats, misleading timelines. A lie didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be plausible enough to force a response. And every response cost Britain time and money. That's the strategic point. Washington wasn't trying to win every battle. He was trying to make the war feel endless. He wanted the British to march far, supply long lines, guard many points, and never feel safe. The Ring helped him do that by making British commanders react to shadows. Here's where the story gets darker and more interesting. Espionage is not romantic. It's paperwork with anxiety. Spies worry about being watched. Couriers worry about patrols. One sloppy mistake can reveal a pattern. A code book can be compromised. A captured letter can end a life. At times, Woodhull feared he was under surveillance and hesitated to act. That fear wasn't weakness. It was accurate, and the British were not stupid. They had their own informers and loyalist networks. They ran counterintelligence. They searched homes. They interrogated civilians. The reason the Culper Ring worked isn't because the British were incompetent. It worked because occupiers depend on local knowledge, and local knowledge is easy to poison. If your locals are lying, your entire strategy is built on fog. A famous example of fog turning lethal is the Benedict Arnold plot. Arnold, one of Washington's best commanders, tried to hand over West Point to the British. West Point controlled a critical stretch of the Hudson River. If Britain held it, the colonies could be cut in two. That's a war-ending move. The British contact, Major John Andre, carried documents that proved the betrayal, and he was caught. Arnold escaped. Andre was executed. Washington learned again that information can end wars faster than 1,000 muskets. Washington also learned to use deception proactively. Sometimes a message intercepted on purpose is more powerful than a secret message delivered safely. If the enemy believes it discovered something, it trusts it more. Washington exploited that psychology. He didn't merely fight the British Army. He fought the British decision-making process. Zooming out, this is why the Revolution survived. Many rebellions die because they can't coordinate, can't predict, and can't endure. The Culper Ring gave Washington enough reliable insight to avoid catastrophic mistakes. It helped preserve the Continental Army, which preserved the political dream. As long as the army existed, Britain couldn't declare victory, and the war couldn't end on Britain's terms. Eventually, Britain didn't collapse. It recalculated. The war became expensive, frustrating, and politically inconvenient. Newspapers amplified failures. Parliament argued. France complicated everything. The question shifted from, can we win, to is winning worth the price? That's the question that ends imperial projects. The Culper Ring didn't answer it directly. It just made the price feel higher every month. And when the end finally came, it wasn't just one glorious moment. It was a chain of coordinated pressure. French naval power mattered. Timing mattered. Surprise mattered. Coordination mattered. Intelligence and deception were the glue that let a weaker side act like a stronger one long enough for Britain to hit its patience limit. One more advantage was simple professionalism. Washington treated intelligence like logistics, not gossip. He filed reports, compared dates, and asked for confirmation before risking his army. That discipline made the Ring more than a rumor mill. It became a decision engine. When British commanders guessed, Washington planned. When they overreacted, he conserved strength. And because his network fed him steady insight, he could look lucky in public while being methodical in private. That is how a smaller force survives against a larger machine. One of the most underrated parts of the Ring is how it turned routine into camouflage. A soldier marching at night is suspicious. A merchant walking home is invisible. A rider in uniform attracts eyes. A tavern keeper on the road looks like commerce. A woman signaling with flags looks like rebellion. A woman hanging laundry looks like Tuesday. That's not just clever, it's a philosophy. If your cover story is literally true, it's harder to break. The code book itself also mattered more than people think. It wasn't only names. It mapped common military terms and places into numbers, so that even if someone recognized a name, they still couldn't reconstruct meaning. It's like encrypting not just the message, but the context. And when the Ring wrote letters, it often embedded coded numbers inside normal sentences. so the writing style still looked innocent. A British reader might think, weird punctuation, not this is a battlefield plan. They also practiced something like source protection. Townsend might hear a plan from an officer, but the message passed to Washington wouldn't reveal where it came from. That way, if Washington acted on it, the British couldn't easily trace the leak back to a specific dinner party, tavern, or clerk. It's the same principle used in modern intelligence. Protect the source, even if it makes the message less dramatic. Talmadge's role becomes clearer when you realize he was coordinating an early version of an intel cycle. Collect, encode, transmit, decode, analyze, act, and assess. If a report proved accurate, trust increased. If a report proved wrong, the network adjusted. That feedback loop is why the Ring didn't devolve into rumor. It wasn't just spies, it was a system learning in real time. And Washington treated it like a system. He didn't merely read messages. He cross-checked. He compared. He asked for confirmations. He learned which sources were reliable and which were noisy. In a world without phones, without photographs, without instant verification, that discipline is leadership. It also explains why Washington could look unnaturally calm. Calm is easier when you aren't blind. Now, let's be honest, and a little meme why. The Culper Ring is basically the 18th century version of someone in your group chat is leaking screenshots. The British kept making plans, and the Americans kept reacting like they already knew. That's not magic. That's exposure. And exposure creates paranoia. Once an occupying power suspects everyone, it spends energy policing itself rather than crushing the rebellion. Paranoia is an empire eating its own tail. The irony is that the Ring's greatest success also guaranteed its anonymity. The better it worked, the less visible it became. After the war, many details remained murky, partly because secrecy protected survivors. That's why the Ring feels like a shadow in the record. But that shadow is the proof. If the British had known exactly who did it, those names would be written in court documents and execution records. And the long-term impact is huge. The revolution didn't just create a new country. It created an American habit of fighting with information. Once a government learns that intelligence and deception can substitute for strength, it keeps using them. You see echoes in later wars, in diplomacy, in politics, in propaganda. The Culper Ring is not a quirky footnote. It's the prototype for the idea that control of narratives is a form of power. So when you hear, the war was won by brave soldiers, yes, bravery mattered. But bravery alone doesn't beat an empire. Systems beat empires. Endurance beats empires. And sometimes a boring letter beats a cannon, because it moves the cannon to the wrong place. That's why this story sticks. It's not just spies were cool. It's a warning. If you only look for threats that are loud and obvious, you will miss the quiet ones. And the quiet ones are the ones that change history. Because empires don't always fall when they're defeated. Sometimes they fall when they're tricked into exhausting themselves. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's still happening. Different tools, same psychology. Confidence, uncertainty, fatigue, and the moment a powerful system finally blinks and says, this isn't worth it anymore. One last detail that makes the Ring feel almost unfair. It exploited Britain's belief that controlling cities meant controlling wars. Britain held New York, so it assumed it held the center. But a city is only a center if the information inside it is reliable. The Ring turned New York into a trap, a place where officers felt safe enough to brag, complain, and gossip, and that comfort produced leaks. Every occupied city has this weakness. When you feel secure, you get careless. Carelessness creates patterns. Patterns create openings, and openings let ordinary people steer decisions. The British didn't lose New York. They lost the truth inside New York. And once you lose the truth, you start paying for mistakes you can't even see.